And I was living in St. Cloud at that time with Sister Mary Ellen McDemus. And one day she said, Renee, why do you think you have to go to another part of the world to be a missionary? That's all she asked. And it was the key that opened the door to, yeah, we've got the poor and we've got the Hispanics here. Why don't I get involved there? And I found out that Father Francisco Schulze was offering a course on Hispanic ministry. So I got permission to go and take that course. It was just what I needed, because at the same time as that course was going on, that little Hispanic community, primarily Mexican community, was just beginning to burgeon out in Cold Spring. And so I thought, I want to do this, I want to go out there. And so he said, yeah, let's have two arms to this class. One a little bit more academic and the other one practice. So I would go out anytime I had time and walk up and down the mobile home park where a lot of them lived. And I know they thought, who's this tall, white woman who speaks Spanish and seems to be interested in us? Is she going to tell the INS or whatever that we're not documented? But I won their trust. And so after, I don't know how many months of doing that, Joe and Paula Schneider, who had been in our campus ministry area, and who happened to have been my spiritual directee, we began talking about this. And she said, oh, Renee, that's where my heart is too. And so we began planning together how this might be, borne out. But we went out there and began walking around, and we thought it would be nice to have some center where the Hispanics are. And so we talked to the guy who owned that whole mobile home park and said, anything available here? He had 2 rentable mobile homes available. And he showed us one, and we said, that's it. It was right on the edge of a block, and so very accessible. And it had a yard, and, well, anyway, that's what it was. So one day when I was visiting a family across the street from Casa Guadalupe, I noticed that the family that had been living in there was loading up their U-Haul. And I thought, I wonder if they're leaving. So I went over to see them. I didn't know who they were, but there they all were. Furniture, everything gone, but they were sitting around drinking their Coke or whatever it was on the floor. And so I just said, I just want to tell you that I'm sorry that you're leaving. I kept looking at that house, and I thought, I think this would be just ideal. A huge open area, the kitchen, the dining room, and the sala, and the parlor. And the more I thought of it, the more I thought, this one is the one that we should take. And so when they left, then that was in end of June, I think. And then I had to go down to New Mexico for some reason, and I can't remember what it was. But we had already talked to Gordy, and he said, well, we'll try it out for a year. He wasn't too sure what would happen if we had this gathering place for Latinos, and what would happen. So he said, well, we'll take it for a bit. And so after a year, he was settled about that. But meanwhile, when I was down in Albuquerque, Joan fitted out that whole mobile home. I don't know where she got all the furniture. Some of it came from her own home. And otherwise, she'd hang things on the wall. Well, it looked like it was already a house of hospitality and resources. So, we moved in almost immediately and began, I don't know, I think I served more coffee and cookies and banana bread than I've ever in my life thought would be available. But it was Sister Burkhard, who was working at Assumption House. She was diabetic, but she loved to bake. So when she knew that, I was doing this, she said, let me do the baking. So I always had my freezer full of her baked goods. And then, people would come, family by family or one by one, and they begin to talk about themselves, and the needs. And it wasn't long before we were taking people to the nurse or to the doctor or to the dentist, or trying to help them find homes or jobs or blankets or furnishings for their own homes. And so that's how it became that house of hospitality and resources. But we didn't only want to give out things, you know. From the very beginning, I kept thinking, we Anglos need to recognize what the gift of the Latinos is for us. And so I always kept trying to say, now, well, what do you want to bring to us? And they could hardly believe that question was put to them, because they had always thought they were the little underdogs and they were given to. Mm-hmm. And with not too much celery. So, I don't know, little by little, it developed into, we had a group for women, we had a group for youth, and we had a wonderful group leader who came and volunteered her time. We had some of the teachers from the grade school, the Catholic grade school in Cold Spring, come down and help the little kids during summer to help them catch up with the others, you know. We had a bed out there, and I remember babysitting now and again, sometimes staying overnight when things would go on into the evening. We had a little garden, and the kids took care of the garden. The fellow next to us allowed us to plow up the area right along his fence. And so it was just about that deep. But the kids planted all kinds of things, and they had to tend it, and then they could have whatever the fruit of that was. Well, that was a wonderful thing, because they love garlic and cilantro and celery and tomatoes and all those things. So that went very well for a while. And we had Mass every Sunday. Sometimes we were in the older part of the church, sometimes in the basement, and then finally we moved to the upstairs. And we had some musicians, we had some dancers. We celebrated Our Lady of Guadalupe feast with the bishop himself, inviting all of us to come to the cathedral church in St. Cloud. And I remember how proud we were. We had about 20 cars, and we made a caravan and went into St. Cloud, and, you know, just kind of puffing out our chests. All of those people into the big cathedral church, and, you know, they weren't used to that. And we had a big dinner, a celebration there, and the bishop was so warm, and he spoke some words to us in Spanish. And to have some Anglo authority figure do that is just, you know, so pleasant and so lovely for them. Well, then I just kept on going, you know, and I tried very hard to get as much cooperation in the town as I could. I went down to the supermarket and I said, would you ever consider getting some Mexican foods in here? Well, after I told him, I went around to the people, I said, what would you like? And so he had at least 70 to 80 products. Mm-hmm. And Father Cletus even said to me, you know, I like that stuff too. So that was nice. I went to the police any number of times, you know, and tried to salve some of the difficulties that we had. Oh, I loved my work there. It felt like everything in my life up to that point had come together. All my teaching, my learning, and my love of people, and a family that I came out of where my mom and dad were always taking food to someone who needed it or whatever, you know, always inviting people in. I learned that. And I lived on a farm, and so, you know, I could relate to some of those things that these farming folk came out of.